Hi everyone, my name is Eve. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. So today is the start of a mini series of themed book recommendations that I will try to give to you. I have thought for a little bit where to start, where do I have the most to say at this time, and I thought since my YA thriller scale slightly edges out adult one at this time, as I'm still studying what adult thrillers have to offer, so to speak, testing my thresholds, I will start with a school-themed YA thriller recommendations. So if YA is completely not your forte, this video might not be the one for you, and that's completely fine. But without any further ado, let's get on with it. So of course, as it is a school-themed recommendation, the action of the book has to mainly take place in a school, in the sense that being at a school actually relevant to the plot. So if a YA thriller is just about school-aged teenagers during a school year, then it might not necessarily qualify. Like if they have one or two scenes at a school, then it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a school-themed thriller. And while a couple of these might be considered dark academia, that is not the point of this list. I'm not sure if I've read enough of them yet to make my own list, so it will be coming at some point in the future, as that is a subgenre slash aesthetic that I'm really keen on, and therefore we'll definitely be looking more into it. But for now, if a couple of them can qualify, for the purpose of this video, they're still school-themed thrillers. And whether or not I loved this book or just thought that it was okay is not also super relevant. It's more so how I think it ties into the theme that I'm making this video about. Of course, if I completely, absolutely hated the book, I would not recommend it. So these are all like 3 stars and up, from fine to really good. And the first one that we have is 13 Minutes by Sarah Pinborough. I thought I might as well start on a positive note with my one of all-time favorites, and this is about a girl called Natasha who is found by this dog walker in a frozen lake during winter, and she's been dead for 13 minutes. And once she does regain consciousness, she approaches this former friend of hers, who is, by the way, the person that most of the book is told from her point of view. She basically approaches this former friend and says, "I think that my current besties did this to me, and I want to know why. Can you help me find out what happened?" And a lot of this book is about friendship dynamics and whether your friends are really your friends, sort of thing. It is very YA in that sense, but as far as thrillery aspects go, because Sarah Pinborough also writes adult thrillers, Behind Her Eyes being probably one of her most, if not the most well-known ones, I would say that as far as the thriller aspect goes, she pushed it as much as she could for a YA thriller, and it's not really that childish in the sense of what happens. Is it a bit insane? Absolutely. I've found that the books of hers can be a bit on the crazier side, but I absolutely loved this one. I remember vividly about 6 years ago, I picked it up at like 11 p.m. and stayed up till like 6 a.m. reading it. My sleep schedule back then was completely messed up, but what can you want from a uni student? It was a thrill ride, and I don't know how I would feel rereading it now. I'm tempted to try, but I don't want to taint the memory. But as it stands, I Loved it. I would recommend it to anyone and everyone. I think it's a good exploration of just how someone can really go too far to prove their point on things. And as usual, teenage girls are something else. I mean, I was one, and still, this is something else. So I would really recommend. Now we are in a bit of a what I call Karen and McManus corner, because as we all know, she is kind of the queen of YA thrillers based around school-age teenagers, and I'm actually planning to do a full video of her bibliography, as at the moment I think she's pretty much the only thriller author whose books I read, like all of them, and I'm working on some others, but for example Lisa Jewell's bibliography, it's insanely massive, so it'll take me a while. But anyway, the books that I felt were the most appropriate for this video are One of Us is Lying, which is pretty much the magnum opus for her writing career, and A Nothing More to Tell, which is at the moment her newest book, or is the last one of the trilogy for One of Us is Lying already out. I'm not entirely sure, but it's one of her newest ones either way. So One of Us is Lying, I feel like most people already know what this one is about, but it's about these 5 kids who end up in detention for XYZ reasons. They all feel like they were essentially forced to be in detention, and then one of them dies in the middle of it. And of course, since the only people in the room as it happened were the other 4, police, they're immediately suspects, and as the title says, they think that one of them is lying and the others are covering it up. And it actually gets to the point where the other characters, I almost said actors, probably because it's also a Netflix series, they're also kind of questioning each other, because while they know of each other, they're not friends. This is not some kind of a friendship story. They forge bonds later, but they start as distant acquaintances at best. I think 2 of them are kind of distant friends, but like nothing crazy, like they're in the same friend group. And as with any Karen McManus book, there's also romance, and there's also some toxic relationship portrayal, which I thought was actually really well done. While this one is not my personal favorite from this author, that would be Two Can Keep a Secret, I was debating whether to include this one, but I thought it's not super school themed, and then there would be a third of the video would be just from one author, so I thought I'll keep it at 2. But I can completely understand why this book took the YA subgenre by storm almost. I'll talk more about it in my Karen and McManus specific video, but I can understand why it's as popular. I have some issues with it, which I'll get to at another time, in that said video, most likely. But I would still recommend it to people, and I would say that for people who are looking to start in the thriller subgenre, but don't want something massively graphic or massively heavy, this is a good place to start, because it is really YA, but again, like, I wouldn't call it super childish. I would say that it has as much depth as something aimed at like 16 to 18 year olds can be, and not to discredit that age group. I mean, age is not necessarily a sign of emotional maturity, but you get what I mean. Obviously there are limits when you write for that group, but I would recommend. For Nothing More to Tell, this one is about this girl who studied at a school where one of her favorite teachers was found dead, and one of the people who found him dead was her childhood friend, who somehow just turned into this massive jackass and basically told her to piss off and that she's being a creep in front of the whole school. So there's some tension there as well. And she ended up moving away for a bit, but then came back, and she joins this true crime podcast as like this internship to help her get into the university of her dreams. And she decides to stir things up and investigate because it just doesn't seem right to her. Like this whole shtick and this whole story. It was just some kind of a random passerby that the police said that's what happened. And things do come out. Let's just say that. Can't say much more without spoiling it. So I will also talk about it later, but to summarize my point, this was the book that restored my faith in Karen M. McManus's ability to write a good YA thriller that is still somewhat rooted in some sense of reality, because her previous two books that came out, while I still enjoyed them, they were a tad disappointing to me in some senses that I will get to. This is not the video for that, but as far as this one goes, I thought it was one of her best in a while, and while it's probably not on the same par as One of Us is Lying or Two Can Keep a Secret, it was a good school mystery that had some twists and turns, and I would definitely recommend it to people. I think it's absolutely in like somewhere in the top half of her bibliography at the moment. Those who are looking for something a bit more slow-paced, I've talked about this one in my top 10 thriller video, but this is The Cheerleaders by Kara Thomas. This is a very autumnal, sort of eerie, suspenseful novel. The main character lives in the small town, and 5 years ago, 5 cheerleaders of the same school in the same year, they all died in various ways, really next to each other time-wise. And one of those cheerleaders was her own sister, and the world just sort of wants to move on. You know, as usual, life goes on, and they want to reinstate the cheerleading team, and she just doesn't feel like it's right, but she can't really say anything. But then turns out that whatever caused all the murders and stuff to happen is not quite done with what they were doing. And a lot of this book is the main character teaming up with this other outcast in the school, and they sort of just go on a bit of a Sherlock Holmes mission, just trying to investigate. And yeah, it doesn't have massively high stakes up until the very end. I would say it's definitely more of a quieter, maybe not even so much of a thriller per se in that sense, but more towards a suspense mystery. But I thought it was good. I had a couple qualms with it that I've already mentioned previously in my video, but overall it's still definitely a favorite for me for a multitude of reasons, and I really enjoyed it. So for those who are looking for something a bit more introspective when it comes to the genre, I would recommend. The next one we have is Deadly Cool by Gemma Halliday, and this is about Hartley, who she finds out that her boyfriend's cheating on her in a very crude way as well, and then her boyfriend is #1 suspect for murder that happens in her school, and he's depending on her to clear his name. And she thinks, you know what, I'm gonna be gracious and forgiving and investigate. This one, I know immediately that it's not gonna be for everyone, especially if you are roughly my age, sort of mid to late 20s. You probably not gonna like this per se, because this one I read, I think like 5 years ago, something like that, and this is very YA. Like I said, some of the YA books, like a couple that I talked about, they don't feel as YA, but this one definitely feels purely like you're in a 16-year-old girl's head, and obviously that's the point of view that it's written from, but I know that it might not be for everyone, so be mindful of that. And this is definitely nothing spectacular, nothing super thought-provoking. If anything, for me, I remember in my tier ranking of thrillers, I put this in the middle. I thought it was okay. It was nothing super amazing, but it was just a breezy read. And then when I saw the plot point, the twist, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Again, it was nothing super special. There is a sequel. I wasn't super inclined to pick it up, especially now I think I wouldn't be inclined to do it. But at the time that I read it, I thought it was good enough to recommend, and I think it's appropriate for this theme because a lot of this book is set during school hours, and obviously, while I'm not sure the murders happen inside the school, I can't remember that detail, but a lot of her trying to solve this anyway, takes place in school. So I thought it was fitting. But whether or not you think that it's just a bit too young for you, it depends. But definitely a fine book for what. One is really highly regarded by a lot of Bookstagram, Booktube. It's Ace of Spades by, sorry, I need to make sure I pronounce it somewhat correctly, Farida Bike Aimide. Sorry, I'm butchering that so bad. I'm so sorry. And this is basically described as Gossip Girl meets Get Out, and it's actually quite accurate, I would say. Just sprinkle a dash of Pretty Little Liars in there as well. So this is about two black teenagers at this super prestige boarding school that start getting targeted anonymous tips. Actually, not them themselves, but the whole school start getting these anonymous tips that are about these two people, and they're just trying to ruin their lives. And for me, I don't think, have I mentioned it? I'm not entirely sure if I mentioned in my tier ranking, but it was disturbing in a way, and it was meant to be, of course, because there's a lot of talks about race, and know that I wasn't the target demographic to understand what these characters went through. I was definitely the target demographic for, feeling uncomfortable because, of course, of my skin color, which this book definitely achieved it in that social justice sense. When it comes to the story itself, I thought that it could have been trimmed down a bit because during the middle, the pacing just felt a bit slow to me, but that's just a quib. To me, and overall, I know that some people said this is dark academia. I guess technically you could describe it as that. Again, would I properly put in a dark academia video if I had more to recommend? I'm not sure, but either way, whatever your opinion of this book is, it's not my all-time favorite because, like I said, pacing was off, but it's a book that I definitely think people should read because it does talk about stuff that is still very much relevant today, even if it does it in a slightly over-the-top way. But then again, after some stuff that you read on the news, is it really that unbelievable? I don't think so. Then we have People Like Us by Dana Mele? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. This one is, again, described as Gossip Girl meets Pretty Little Liars. I feel like anything that features unlikable teenagers gets automatically likened to Gossip Girl. And you know what, that's fair enough. I mean, Gossip Girl is my comfort trash, as I call it. I mean, especially in the later seasons, it just gets so much, but I still love it. I mean, I'm probably gonna rewatch it soon, but I have so many new shows to watch. Anyway, shows are a completely different thing. I might make a video about them at some point, but at the moment, the priority for the show. This is yet another slower book. I definitely wouldn't call it some kind of a high action-packed thriller, nothing like that. It's definitely more of a suspense mystery, and it's basically about these girls in boarding school, and they discover a dead body of their classmate. And then shortly afterwards, the main character, she starts receiving these threats from this website that seems to have been made by the girl who they found dead, and turns out that she had some kind of problems with every single one of her friends. So she's basically threatening, either you ruin your best friends' lives or there'll be even worse consequences. And she recruits this outcast to help her because she's good with computers, and she's just trying to get to the bottom of it. And again, I feel like this one could have been a bit shorter. 400 pages, I feel like it definitely could have been a bit shorter, because I think this one I also rated just fine, like in the tier ranking of all my favorite, not favorite, but all the thriller books that I have read ever that I can remember. And there were some of my all-time favorites there, but also quite a few ones that I thought were just fun. And this was one of those, like, I wouldn't reread it, but I thought that for the purpose of a school-themed thriller recommendation, suspense, mystery, whatever, it's definitely the one that fits, as pretty much all the action is set in a school, and it's actually a huge part of the plot because it involves scholarships and expulsions and stuff like that. So I think that it really fits. I will say that if you're looking for some kind of super complex characters, this is probably not the book where you're gonna find them, because as much as the plot was quite slow paced, this is a very plot driven book. There wasn't much character study in it, and like I said, it was fine. And I mean, I really like the cover. Is it bad that the cover is one of the most enticing parts about it? I'm not sure, but it really nailed the whole aesthetic of it. But as for the story, there are mixed opinions, but if the premise sounds intriguing at all, I would still definitely recommend to check it out and make your own. It's really difficult to shelve. Technically, I have it in my horror books, but I'm putting it in a thriller video because I feel like this is the sort of book that really intertwines the two, but if nothing else above all, it's an exploration of toxic dynamics, and this is The Furies by Katie Lowe. This one, I remember when I had to go at Bookstagram, I had it during lockdown, and then I found that bits about it just weren't working for me per se. I saw this one being talked about, and I was so hyped and so excited for it. And when I read it about 3 years ago, I was quite let down, but now, after reading some similar books since then, I've had the time to reflect, and actually, I think I put it in the great tier, not all-time favorite, but like, if I was asked 3 years ago, I would have put it in like disappointing or average. But this one is about this girl, Violet, who joins this prestige school, and this one, I would say definitely could apply as a bit of a dark academia vibe. Essentially joins the school and gets invited into this group to talk about stuff they don't talk about in a normal class, and turns out that there's a bit of witchery going on there. And she also befriends these girls who are really intense, and thing is, whether or not there is actual magic in the story, without spoiling the plot, I can tell you that that is debatable, I would say. Nothing in this book is super outright or super easy to sort of decipher. I would say it's quite a complex read, and again, the characters aren't necessarily likable. This book was compared to The Craft movie, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I can definitely see where it's coming from. And again, I would say that the sort of horror and the dread that comes from this book isn't necessarily from like actual horror elements, because there aren't many, but it's more so from that real life icky feeling that can come from realizing that you're dealing with some really toxic and intense people in your life, but that you're so far into it that it's hard to pull yourself out of that dynamic. And I thought that was well done, and I'm thinking now that I have that bit of an introspective, I will probably reread it at some point and see how I feel. But yeah, I would definitely recommend this one, and yeah, it will make you think, I think. And I realized after I was already done editing and preparing my thriller tier ranking that I completely somehow forgot to include it, and I don't know why, because I had an opinion on it, and it was Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. So this is about this true crime enthusiast who joins this boarding school and tries to solve an old cold case mystery that is basically, it's what made the school famous. And she meets all these people along the way, and I remember quite enjoying it. And the atmosphere was great, the characters were interesting, there was a bit of a romance in there. And while I don't read romance as a primary genre, I still enjoy seeing romantic dynamics in thrillers, especially because they're always quite intense and not just lovey-dovey, because I just don't like particularly reading, watching it. Anyway, so this one was quite enjoyable, but the one qualm I remember feeling about it was that it was very obviously written with in mind that it would be a series. And that's all I would say, really. If you're looking for just like a standalone book that you read, boom, boom, you're done with it, this is not the book for you, because it basically spends a lot of its time setting up the story that it's going to explore in other books. So if you're not a series reader, again, it's probably not the book for you, because I myself, I read some series, but if I had to pick, I would say definitely standalones, always, which is interesting because if I had to pick between TV shows and movies overall, while I have some all-time favorite movies overall, I would pick TV series. I'm not sure how that works, but either way, standalone books. And I read this about 2 years ago, and I've still not been inclined to pick up the others in the series, so I'm not sure if I will, but I still enjoyed this one for what it was. And it definitely fits all the, I mean, there's boarding school, there's a bit of sort of maybe dark academia feel, in the sense that it's an old case and it involves like studious activities, and yeah, it's definitely appropriate for the theme. But it's time to conclude this video. I hope that you found some new potential books to add to your TBR. If you've read any of them, please comment. I would love to have a discussion. Or if YA is just something that's not working for you, then I'm also interested in having that discussion. I feel like there's quite some ground to cover when it comes to that. And if you like this video, please rate, comment, subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon.